What if the biggest obstacle in your life isn't your circumstances, it's the way you've trained yourself to avoid discomfort? What if every time you procrastinate, every time you avoid a hard conversation, every time you scroll instead of sit with your own thoughts, you're not being lazy? You're following a pattern so old, so deeply human, that one psychiatrist built an entire life-changing philosophy around it. Here's the strange part. Most people believe life is supposed to get easier once they figure it out. Once they get the job, the relationship, the money, the routine. But according to the man who wrote one of the most influential psychology books of the last century, that belief is exactly what keeps people stuck. Because life isn't supposed to get easier. Life is difficult. And the moment you truly accept that, something in you changes forever. That single sentence, "Life is difficult," opens one of the best-selling personal development books ever written. It sat on the New York Times bestseller list for over a decade. Not for a few weeks, not for a year, for more than 10 years, this book stayed on the list, quietly changing the lives of millions of readers, therapists, parents, and everyday people just trying to figure out how to live well. The book is called The Road Less Traveled. Its author, Morgan Scott Peck, was a psychiatrist who spent years listening to people in his office. Successful people, broken people, confused people, all wrestling with the same invisible question: why is life so hard, and what do I do about it? What he discovered wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't a 5-step formula or a morning routine. It was something deeper. A way of understanding pain, love, growth, and truth that, once you hear it, you can't unhear. So today, we're going to walk through the core ideas of this book together. Not as a lecture, but as a conversation. By the end, you're going to look at your own struggles, your procrastination, your relationships, your fears, completely differently. Let's begin where Peck begins. With the hardest truth first. Life is difficult. Most people read that and nod politely, the way you'd nod at any obvious statement. Yes, of course life is hard, everyone knows that. But Peck isn't talking about knowing it intellectually. He's talking about something far rarer, actually accepting it, in your bones, as a permanent condition rather than a temporary inconvenience. Think about how differently you'd handle a traffic jam if you expected traffic every single day, versus if you believed the roads should always be clear and got furious every time they weren't. The traffic is the same either way. What changes is your suffering. This is Peck's opening move, and it's brilliant precisely because it's so simple. Most people's daily frustration isn't caused by the difficulty of life itself. It's caused by the secret belief that life shouldn't be this difficult. That something has gone wrong. That they're the exception who's supposed to have it easier. Picture a young professional, let's call her Maya, who works hard, is talented, and still gets passed over for a promotion. Most people in that moment think, this isn't fair, this shouldn't be happening to me. And that thought, that sense of exception, of injustice, becomes its own second layer of suffering, stacked right on top of the disappointment itself. But imagine Maya had internalized, deep down, that setbacks like this are simply part of what it means to build a career, to be human, to want things. The disappointment would still sting. But the added layer, the shock, the sense of persecution, would disappear. She'd move through the pain instead of getting stuck circling it. This is the first major shift the book asks of you. Stop treating difficulty as an interruption to your life. Start treating it as the raw material your life is made of. But here's where it gets interesting, because accepting that life is hard naturally raises the next question. How do we actually deal with the hard parts without falling apart or running away? And Peck's answer to that question becomes the true engine of the entire book. That answer is one word: discipline. Now, before you tune out at the word discipline, because let's be honest, it sounds like something a drill sergeant would yell, understand that Peck means something much warmer and more practical than rigid self-control. For Peck, discipline is simply the set of tools we use to solve life's problems with as little unnecessary suffering as possible. And he breaks it into 4 techniques. Once you understand these 4, you'll start noticing them, or the lack of them, in almost every situation in your life. The first technique is delaying gratification. Here's a scene almost everyone recognizes. You come home exhausted after a long day. There's a sink full of dishes and there's a couch calling your name. Most people sit down first, tell themselves they'll do the dishes in a minute, and that minute quietly turns into the next morning. Peck would say the healthier path is almost the opposite instinct. Face the unpleasant task first, get the discomfort out of the way, and then genuinely enjoy your rest afterward, without the low hum of guilt sitting in the background. That's delayed gratification in its simplest form, choosing to experience the pain first and the pleasure second, instead of the other way around. It sounds almost too basic to matter, but Peck argues this single habit, repeated across thousands of small daily decisions, is one of the biggest dividing lines between people who feel in control of their lives and people who feel like life is happening to them. Think about a student studying for an important exam. One student opens social media just for 5 minutes before starting, and that 5 minutes swallows the evening. Another sits down, does the hardest, most boring chapter first, and only then allows herself to relax, knowing the work is actually done. Same amount of free time in both cases. Completely different emotional experience. One is soaked in guilt, the other is genuinely peaceful. What Peck is really describing here is a mental muscle. And like any muscle, avoiding it makes it weaker, using it makes it stronger. Every single time you choose short-term discomfort over long-term regret, you're not just finishing a task, you're training your mind to trust itself a little more. But delaying gratification is only the first tool. The second one is even more uncomfortable to talk about because it touches something almost everyone secretly resists. That second technique is accepting responsibility. Peck tells a story from his clinical work about two people, a foreign officer stationed overseas and a soldier back home, who both come to him with the exact same complaint. They don't like their environment, they don't like the people around them, they feel stuck. The officer says, "There's nothing I can do, I have to be here, it's my duty." The soldier says the exact same thing, word for word, about his own base. Both of them are describing the same feeling with the same excuse, "I have no choice." But Peck's insight is that this, "I have no choice," is almost never entirely true. There is always a choice. It might be a hard one, a costly one, a scary one, but it exists. What people are really saying is, "I don't want to take responsibility for choosing this, so I'll frame it as something forced on me." This might be the most quietly radical idea in the whole book. Most of us walk around subtly avoiding responsibility every single day, and we don't even notice we're doing it. We say things like, "My partner makes me so angry. My job is stressing me out. My parents made me this way." Every one of those sentences hands away our power to something outside ourselves. Now, to be clear, Peck isn't saying other people's actions don't affect us. Of course they do. But there's a critical difference between "this situation is difficult" and "I have no control over how I respond to it." The first is honest. The second is a quiet form of self-deception that feels comforting in the moment and costly over a lifetime. Picture two employees who both get harsh, unfair feedback from a manager. One spends the next month complaining to coworkers, replaying the injustice, feeling like a victim. The other feels the same sting of unfairness. Anger is a completely valid reaction, but then asks a different question. Regardless of whether this was fair, what's within my control here? Do I need a conversation with my manager? Do I need to look for a role that fits me better? Do I need to let this go? Same wound. Two completely different trajectories, because one person owns their next move and the other hands it away. Here's the twist most people miss, though. Peck also warns about the opposite extreme, taking on responsibility that isn't actually yours. Some people, especially those raised to feel they must fix everyone and everything around them, walk through life apologizing for things that were never their fault, exhausting themselves trying to control other people's emotions and choices. That's not responsibility. That's a different kind of avoidance, avoiding the discomfort of setting boundaries. So the real skill Peck is pointing to is precision. Learning to ask, honestly, in any painful situation, what part of this is actually mine to carry, and what part isn't? That single question, asked consistently, quietly reshapes a person's entire emotional life. Now we arrive at the third discipline, And this one might be the most demanding of all, because it asks you to give up something almost everyone clings to without realizing it: comfortable illusions. Peck calls this dedication to truth, or as he sometimes frames it, dedication to reality. Here's the idea in plain terms. Every one of us builds a kind of internal map of how the world works. What people are like, what we're capable of, what's fair, what's dangerous, what love is supposed to look like. We build that map when we're young, based on limited experience, and then we spend the rest of our lives navigating using that same outdated map, rarely updating it, because updating it is uncomfortable. It means admitting we were wrong about something. It means facing feelings we've been avoiding. Think about someone who grew up believing that showing emotion means weakness. That belief might have made total sense as a defense mechanism during a difficult childhood. But that same person, 30 years later, sitting across from a partner who's begging for emotional openness, is still using a map drawn for a completely different terrain. The map hasn't been updated. And the mismatch between the old map and current reality is where enormous, unnecessary suffering lives. This is why Peck insists that mental health, real mental health, is essentially an ongoing, lifelong commitment to seeing things as they actually are, even when that's painful, rather than as we wish they were or fear they are. Every time we distort reality to protect our comfort, we're taking out what he calls a psychological loan. And loans, eventually, come due. With interest. Think about a small business owner who avoids looking at the actual numbers because deep down he suspects they're bad. For months he tells himself things are probably fine. That avoidance feels good in the short term. No scary spreadsheet, no anxiety attack. But reality doesn't pause and wait for him to feel ready. The problem keeps growing in the dark, and by the time he's forced to face it, it's far larger and far harder to fix than it would have been if he'd looked honestly, early, even though that early look would have hurt more in the moment. This is why Peck says that truth-telling, to others, but especially to ourselves, is an act of love, not cruelty. Withholding an honest thought, to protect someone's feelings, often protects our own comfort far more than theirs. A parent who never tells their child the honest truth about a harmful pattern isn't being kind. They're avoiding the discomfort of conflict and calling it kindness. But, and this is important, Peck does not say we owe everyone total, brutal honesty at all times. That's not dedication to truth, that's just using truth as a weapon. He describes something more like discernment, choosing honesty with people who genuinely have a stake in it, delivered with care, rather than blurting every thought out of some misguided sense of purity. The goal isn't to be harsh. The goal is to stop lying to yourself, and to stop letting comfortable illusions run your most important decisions. What can we take from this today? A simple, quiet practice. Every time you feel the urge to avoid an uncomfortable fact about your health, your finances, your relationship, your career, pause and ask, am I protecting myself, or am I just delaying pain and making it bigger? There's one more discipline, and it's the glue that holds the other three together. Peck calls it balancing. Life constantly asks us to hold two good things in tension: honesty and kindness, ambition and rest, freedom and structure. Discipline itself, if taken too far, becomes rigidity. A person so obsessed with control that they can't relax, adapt, or feel joy. Peck is very clear that discipline isn't about becoming a joyless robot. It's about developing enough flexibility to know which tool the moment requires. Think of a parent raising a teenager. Too much control, and the teenager either rebels or grows up unable to make their own decisions. Too little structure, and the teenager grows up without any internal compass at all. The wise parent is constantly balancing, tightening here, loosening there, adjusting as the relationship grows. That's not a formula you memorize once. It's a skill you practice for a lifetime. So there they are, the 4 disciplines. Delaying gratification, accepting responsibility, dedication to truth, and balancing it all with flexibility instead of rigidity. Together, Peck says, these aren't just techniques for solving problems. They're the foundation for something even bigger, something almost every person on earth is searching for, often without knowing what to call it. That something is love. But here, and this is where the book takes its most surprising turn, Peck is about to challenge almost everything you've ever been told about what love actually is. Most of us grow up absorbing a very particular idea of love from movies, songs, and stories. Love as a feeling that overtakes you. Love as falling. Love as something that happens to you, out of your control, sweeping you off your feet. Peck says, respectfully, that this popular idea of love is largely a myth, and worse, it's a myth that quietly damages real relationships. He points out that falling in love, that dizzy, breathless feeling of infatuation, is actually a temporary collapse of the boundaries between two people. For a little while, your sense of self expands to include another person, and that expansion feels euphoric, almost like a return to childhood, when the boundary between you and your caregiver felt blurry and safe. But this state is, by its nature, temporary. It cannot last, because eventually reality reasserts itself. You remember you are a separate individual with your own needs, flaws, and limits, and so is your partner. This is why so many people panic when the initial spark fades 6 months or 2 years into a relationship. They think something has gone wrong. Peck's answer is almost relieving once you hear it. Nothing has gone wrong. The infatuation was never love in the first place. It was the opening act. Real love is what has to be chosen, deliberately, after the curtain falls. So what is real love, according to Peck? His definition is precise and worth sitting with. Love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing your own or another person's spiritual growth. Notice what that definition does not include. It doesn't include a feeling. It includes will, meaning intention, effort, choice. And it includes growth, meaning the goal of real love isn't comfort or possession, it's helping someone, including yourself, become more fully who they're capable of being. This reframes almost everything. A parent who does every single thing for their child, never allowing struggle, never allowing failure, might feel like they're overflowing with love. But if that overprotection stunts the child's growth, Peck would call it something else entirely, not love, but a kind of anxious dependency dressed up as love. Compare that to a parent who lets their child struggle with a hard problem, resisting the urge to swoop in and fix it, because they understand that the struggle itself is where growth happens. That parent's love is quieter, less immediately gratifying, and far more powerful. Peck is especially firm on one point: real love always requires effort. If it doesn't cost you anything, your time, your comfort, your ego, it probably isn't love, at least not in the way he defines it. This is why he separates true love so sharply from dependency. Dependency says, I need you in order to feel okay. Love says, I choose to show up for your growth and mine, even when it's inconvenient. Think about modern dating and social media for a second, because this idea has never been more relevant than it is right now. So much of what gets celebrated online, grand gestures, constant messaging, the fear of losing someone, often looks a lot more like anxious attachment than like Peck's definition of love. Real love, by contrast, often looks quiet. It looks like someone showing up on an ordinary Tuesday to have a difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. It looks like telling someone an uncomfortable truth because you care more about their growth than about keeping the peace. It looks like giving someone space to fail and trusting them to get back up. What can we take from this? Stop measuring love by intensity of feeling and start measuring it by consistency of effort. Ask not, do I feel swept away? But, am I actually extending myself, my time, my honesty, my patience, toward this person's genuine well-being and my own? Now here's where the book goes somewhere most self-help books never dare to go. Having built this entire foundation, difficulty, discipline, truth, love, Peck asks an even bigger question. Where does all of this lead? What is the actual point of a lifetime spent growing? His answer is spiritual growth. And he means this in a broad, inclusive sense, not necessarily tied to any one religion, but as the ongoing evolution of a person's consciousness, their capacity for love, their relationship with reality itself. Peck introduces a concept here that's genuinely fascinating. The idea that laziness, at its deepest level, isn't really about being unmotivated. It's a kind of resistance to growth itself, what he sometimes frames as a pull toward the familiar and comfortable, away from the effort that change requires. He calls this force entropy, the natural pull toward staying the same, toward staying in old patterns, even ones that hurt us, simply because change requires energy and risk. Think about someone who knows, absolutely knows, that a relationship or a job is no longer good for them. They can see it clearly. And yet month after month passes and nothing changes. That's not necessarily weakness of character. Peck would say that's entropy, the gravitational pull of the familiar, quietly winning out over the unfamiliar effort of growth. Against this pull, Peck places what he calls grace, moments of unexpected help, insight, or strength that seem to arrive from beyond our conscious effort. A sudden clarity in the middle of a crisis. An unexpected act of kindness from a stranger at exactly the right moment. A piece of wisdom that arrives, seemingly out of nowhere, right when you need it most. You don't have to interpret this in any particular religious way to find it useful. Even understood simply as the mysterious, often unacknowledged forces of resilience, insight, and support that show up in human life, the concept is powerful. It suggests that growth isn't a solo grind against impossible odds. There is, in Peck's view, something on your side. If you're willing to keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep choosing truth over illusion and effort over comfort. This ties back to something Peck says almost in passing but which lands like a thunderclap. Mental illness, in many of its forms, isn't the opposite of mental health so much as it's what happens when a person avoids legitimate suffering. Avoiding necessary pain doesn't make the pain disappear. It just relocates it, distorts it, and often makes it larger. A person who never grieves a real loss doesn't skip the grief. They carry it, unprocessed, into every future relationship. A person who never confronts an old wound doesn't heal it by ignoring it. They simply reenact it, again and again, often without recognizing the pattern. This is genuinely one of the most freeing ideas in the entire book. Your pain is not a sign that something is uniquely wrong with you. Very often, it's a sign that you're finally facing something real, something you've been avoiding, and that facing it, however uncomfortable, is the very thing that leads to growth. The people Peck saw stay stuck in his office weren't the ones in the most pain. They were the ones most skilled at avoiding it. What can we take from this? Stop treating discomfort as proof that you're failing at life. Sometimes discomfort is proof that you've finally stopped running. Let's bring this all the way back down to earth, because everything we've covered, difficulty, discipline, truth, love, growth, isn't meant to stay abstract. Peck wrote this book as a working guide, not a philosophy lecture. So imagine this is Sunday evening and you're dreading Monday. Instead of numbing that dread with another hour of mindless scrolling, imagine picking one honest question to sit with. What am I avoiding right now that, if I faced it, would actually make my life better? Maybe it's a conversation you've been postponing. Maybe it's an honest look at your finances. Maybe it's admitting a relationship isn't what you keep telling yourself it is. Maybe it's admitting you're the common denominator in a repeating pattern of conflict. Peck would say, don't rush to fix it tonight. Just stop lying to yourself about it. That alone, that one act of honest seeing, is the doorway. Discipline gives you the tools. Truth shows you where to point them. Love gives you a reason worth using them for. And growth is simply what happens, slowly, almost invisibly, when you keep choosing this path, day after day, long after it stops feeling difficult and starts feeling like who you are. So let's come back to where we started. Life is difficult. That was never meant to discourage you. It was meant to set you free, free from the exhausting belief that something is wrong with you every time things get hard, free to stop waiting for ease that was never coming, and free to start building the one thing that actually lasts, character forged through honest effort. The road less traveled isn't glamorous. It doesn't look impressive on social media. It looks like doing the dishes before you rest. It looks like owning your choices instead of blaming your circumstances. It looks like telling yourself the truth even when a comfortable lie would feel so much easier. It looks like loving people by showing up for their growth, not just their comfort. And it looks like sitting with pain instead of running from it, trusting that on the other side of that discomfort is a version of you that's wiser, steadier, and more whole. Morgan Scott Peck didn't promise this path would be easy. He promised something better, that it would be worth it. So here's the real question to carry with you after this video ends. Not, how do I make my life easier, but, what is the one difficult, honest thing I've been avoiding, and what would it cost me to finally face it? That question, sitting with you tonight, might be the beginning of your own road less traveled. If this summary resonated with you, the full book goes even deeper into these ideas, with case studies and reflections that are worth experiencing firsthand. Take what you've heard today, and let it be the start of something, not the end of it.